Today we're talking about advice to a younger self. So I just turned 35 this year. So I started thinking, that's just kind of like a nice round number. So what's the advice I'd give my 25-year-old self about training and life?
So how about we start off with some training stuff? We both jotted down some notes for this, and it's funny because I took a peek at his, and we both wrote the same thing as our first one, and it was keep it simple. Just sticking with the basics, push-ups, pull-ups, squats, deadlifts. Like those are the most important things for strength training. And the more you deviate from those, it's not like it's bad, but also you're always going to come back to the basics, so you might as well just stick with them and master them. And like think about if you were to just keep doing those for a really long time, 10 years. That's how you're going to really gain some steam and build a physique and also a body that like can do a lot,
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, if you just do that once a week for a long time, like you'll have a lot of other time. You have 6 other days of the week to dedicate to anything else that you want, but you'll still be like just stacking up weeks of, hitting the basics. And that's what if I could go back in time, start again, I would have just made sure to keep that once a week and not, like you could get really obsessed and start going 3 times a week, 4 times a week, hitting these moves, and then you burn yourself out or you get injured or something like that. So it's like play the long game, and then like I said, then you could maybe dedicate another couple days to a different type of training or to something more skill related or something like that.
Yeah, I think one thing that I wrote down that I think resonates with what you said is train as often as feels good, not past that. Because I think oftentimes when you train too much and you get like really hyper focused on gaining muscle or whatever, it's not that it's bad again, but you can become a slave to that pursuit. You're building your ego around those things, and like you burn yourself out. You get, we've both been there where we train too much, and then you have injuries, you have setbacks, and if your self-worth is wrapped up in that, then life feels pretty shitty.
Yeah, another thing that I wrote was that I would have tried to do a combination of calisthenics, bodybuilding, powerlifting, the kind of like those 3 as the main juice there. But what I did was I went way too hard into powerlifting and barbells, and I got myself all stiff and like, aching and injury. And then I was like, oh, you know what? Like I started doing more calisthenics, and then I was just all in for calisthenics. And I was like, this is the answer. And it was really helping me like get my body back. But if I just would have from the start, just like took the good things from power, like let's improve my squat over a course of a year, 5 years. And then also do pull-ups and also, have like, pistol squats as well to like maintain mobility and stuff like, there's a nice way to blend everything. And it's like, if you're just doing calisthenics, like you could probably benefit a lot from, just some accessory bodybuilding type work. And yeah, it's like not going so dogmatic to be like, I'm the calisthenics dude, I'm the powerlifter dude. Just, man, it is all valuable at some point.
Yeah, everything's a tool. And like you wouldn't only use one tool all the time. So treat them as tools. You just have a bunch of tools in your tool belt, and you can what's cool is like you can get better at using those tools. So you can get better at powerlifting, you can get better at calisthenics, but it's still the same tool, and you know when to use it and how to use it.
Yeah, and for a skill, so an interesting one for me right now, I'm getting back to training hollow back Mexican handstand. And I actually last year at the same time of year I was training it, and I was just looking back through some videos, and it was starting to get like mediocre. And then I stopped training it because I kind of got excited about some other things. Start training it again now, and I think like, wow, if I just would have kept that in my schedule once a week for and I would have got 8 months that I didn't train it, like I would be a Mexican handstand god right now, right? But really, like if there is something that you want to get good at, say it's a handstand, you don't have to necessarily, it comes back to the same thing as a strength training. You don't have to go all balls to the wall. You can do something once a week. You can, and as long as you're touching on it once a week, just keeping the consistency, you'll get super good at it in a year's time.
Yeah, what's the quote? We overestimate what we can do in a day and underestimate what we can do in a year. But it's true though, like how often is it that you're working on something and you think like today matters so much and you're just gonna do so much work to work on it, when really that's not how your body responds to training. That's not how your like actual mind responds to skill work.
Yeah.
Like more doesn't equal better in one day. More equals better over a long time.
Yeah.
And so just keeping that in mind, I think that's also really nice because it takes the pressure off the day. So even if it's not going super well today, you're like, well, I'm going to be back at it.
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing this for a long time. So who cares if I keep falling in my Mexican?
Yeah. And once again, this is, it's taken me 10 years to kind of learn this, not even fully learn this. So, there's value in learning it. And I don't think just me saying it or you hearing it or whatever can fully make anyone understand.
You gotta feel it.
Yeah, it just takes time. So even though I think this video is cool and really valuable, it's like sometimes you just got to go through just messing up a lot.
Yep. Yeah, and it's funny because I think, really it's everything, because it's the same thing I wrote down for flexibility. Just do it. Just stay after it.
Yeah.
Flexibility training is something that most people don't prioritize at all. So, some just like one day a week of really dedicated flexibility, and especially, and maybe this is like a slightly different topic, but like understanding your weak points and prioritizing those to a certain extent is really important. I think that goes for kind of all realms of training, but just being realistic with what you're good at and what you're not. And unless you're a professional athlete or you're like very competitive or something, you should probably just work for some semblance of balance in your body more than like really focused on one direction. And that means that like if your hamstrings are really stiff, then you should be stretching your hamstrings pretty regularly.
Yeah, so that's very theoretical, but we said we wanted to get more practical. So I would have, when it comes to flexibility, just as a very practical thing, I would have started stretching my inner thighs way earlier and just consistently doing that, because like to your point, that's my main weakness. Like I was able to get my hamstrings really flexible without a whole lot of work, which is cool. Inner thighs, not the same story. And it just needs more time, and it needs more consistency and frequency.
Yeah, exposure. I think flexibility is an interesting one though, because you should probably have one day where you're very dedicated to getting more flexible, but also you should be using that range of motion regularly.
Yeah.
And if you don't have some activity you're doing that makes you use it, then maybe doing something like hanging every day.
Yeah.
Having a daily practice of some kind that like just reminds your body of what you want it to be able to do is really important.
It's not necessarily like you're training your flexibility super intense and trying to gain more range of motion every day, but it's just like you're kind of touching within your range, but like to the limit. And if you're consistently doing that, then your body understands, oh, okay. And that was actually what I wrote down for flexibility as my number one, was to just use it more. Like I didn't really start using my flexibility until I started doing more ground movement, which you can watch one of the last episodes about ground movement. And that's one of I think that's one of the really valuable things about it, is it forces you to get in positions that challenge your mobility. So when I started doing that, I could see where my weaknesses were, but then also if I'm doing this 2-3 times a week, I'm touching the ends of my range of motion. I'm telling my body I want to have this like capacity to move, and it very much is like a functional flexibility. But it's like even if you were to pick a sport like climbing, the further you take your climbing, the more you're going to need to like get your hips wide against the wall and stuff like that, right? So it's like if you choose an activity that forces you to have some good range of motion, especially the deeper that you go into it, that's really awesome, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's something that is important, is just having at least one activity that pushes you to want to continue to grow. And so, climbing, ground movement, jujitsu, breakdancing, whatever, like, I don't know, maybe it's a sport, basketball, but like something that's a motivator outside of just thinking about your body as a machine, and like trying to like just always like increase attributes. It's like you also just want to feel good in your sport, your activity. And so having one of those things that you get to come back to regularly that allows you to enjoy your body, and it's to me, it's one of the most important things.
I like how we kind of gave our flexibility deficits what we would have worked on. How about for strength training? I just want to throw in the ring that I was never very good at pull-ups, and I just avoided them.
Oh yeah.
And it's not till like the last couple of years that I've put so much time into my pull-ups, and I've like, feel like I'm just getting back to like, to ground level, like getting back that deficit. I would have started pull-ups just really early on, just trying to get good technique, trying to get good range of motion there. And then I think squatting as well. Like I've never been a very great squatter, and I think just like not getting my ego wrapped up into it and trying to like, oh, I got to increase my squat a bunch, but just getting better at squatting,
Yeah. So before I tell mine, that's a really, I think, important message is you don't always have to work at your highest strength capabilities all the time. And I think sometimes it can work against you, because for me, I would do a decent amount of pull-ups, but my pull-up form was so bad.
Yeah, right.
And I would just be pulling with like weird muscles, with weird like body positions.
Yeah.
And it was because I was always thinking about how many or how much weight I could add, that my technique just got probably worse and worse over time.
Yeah.
And so I had to go back and basically relearn how to do it. So, and I would say that was probably the same for someone like squatting as well. And so, you don't always have to focus so much on just increasing. Another way to think about growth is also just getting better at the skill. Quality over, yeah. For me, definitely overhead pressing.
Oh, overhead pressing,
Yeah. I mean, I just had shoulder injuries, and so I just didn't put my arms overhead for a long time, and then it's only been like pretty recently to where I'm like, all right, this is a problem.
Yeah.
I need to.
Well, you've been working it a lot in like the last year, right?
Yeah.
2 years maybe.
Yep. And that's it's been very humbling, because it's almost something you can, when it's a weakness, you can avoid it, and you can almost just like put it in a corner of your mind and then not have to acknowledge it or think about it. But then once you start working on it, brings it to the forefront.
Yeah.
You're like, oh man, this is a problem. But also it feels so good to bring up a weakness.
It does. Yeah, definitely.
Kind of feels like a superpower for a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think for me, like my overhead pressing has been somewhat of like a strength. Or it's just come easier than, for example, pulling. And like I went through like 2 years of like working on my handstand push-up like so much in like unlocking it, but I wasn't doing much pulling during all that time. It's like you said, I was kind of putting that in the closet and like, I'm not going to look at that too much. But yeah, it feels better to bring up the stuff that you're bad at, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah. How about Oh, go ahead.
I got one more on training.
Okay, yeah.
Have some fun.
have some fun. Well, actually, I wanted to touch on like for an activity or a sport.
Yeah.
I think like the advice that I'd give myself is I don't know if we've talked about this on Primal Projects, but I feel like we might have, and that is to kind of, it's like, I think it was Rafe Kelly's idea. Kind of have one thing that you're almost specializing in, like your main sport, and then have a couple other things that you're also learning and that you're good at. But you always have like your main thing that's like, that's my bread and butter. That's what I can always come back to.
Yeah.
But you can also leave that thing because you've become pretty proficient in it. And then you can choose to like, oh, I'm going to like really concentrate on this thing right now because it's exciting to me. But all in all, like kind of what made me think of it is like have more fun. And the more that you do and the more you can become proficient in things, I think the more fun you can have.
Yeah, definitely. I think the cool thing about having an expertise, I mean, it's essentially what you said, like competency feels good. And so if you have something you can come back to and feel competent with, then it actually makes going out and trying other things maybe even a little more fun because you're like, you can always you have something to fall back onto at least, you know? And so it takes the pressure off of like, well, I'm going to go try this thing and I suck at it, you know? And it's, you know, maybe that's not the best way to think about it, but it definitely feels that way once in a while.
I agree. It really does. It really does. Like, I think because I'm semi-proficient in different various movement type things, like, it's like I can go and like be a beginner in climbing and like be like, I suck at this, but not like feel that so deeply because
Yeah.
I'm like, but I'm also good at some other things. So like my ego doesn't take as big of a hit. It almost likes being bad at something.
Yeah.
Versus if I didn't have any like proficiency though, then I might be like, fuck man, like I just suck at everything.
Life's hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I don't think we talked so much about like skill training, and so maybe it's separate than an activity. Because to me, an activity is more like a sport, whereas like a skill is more like your handstand push-up.
Yeah.
And so you know the strength training it's distinct from skill training. There's a lot of overlap.
Sure.
Like a skill training could include strength training, flexibility training.
Handstand push-ups a perfect example of something that's high skill and high strength.
Yeah, and so to me, it's important to have like your basic strength training that you're always kind of coming back to, like what you said, once a week for 10 years, and also at any given time, maybe having 1 to 3 different projects. You know what I mean? So like a handstand push-up, maybe just a handstand, like something that that keeps you really motivated to keep coming back to it because the basics get boring. Let's be completely honest here, you know?
But they support each other. The basics help you have the strength to then go be able to play with that handstand or that handstand push-up. You know, if you've been doing pull-ups for 5 years, then you're going to be at a pretty good base to then go start like training a front lever or something like that. But it's exactly what you're saying. Like if you can just keep a couple of those goals going, I think it's like so motivating and you start to see progress and you're like, whoa, like I used to only be able to do a super tucked front lever and now like I can extend my knees a little bit further. Like you see that progress, you see yourself getting closer to something. It feels really, really good. And it feels good to gain strength, like in the basics, but I think it almost feels a little bit better to like unlock a skill, in my opinion. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. And skills don't always have to be strength related. You could also choose maybe have one strength related skill and then one skill that maybe forces you to work on your flexibility more.
Yeah.
Or even
like
you know whatever. Maybe it's your balance or your coordination, like whatever attribute. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like, so for example, you know, like say a macaco, we've talked about that on StrengthSide a lot, and like that will force you to get pretty flexible if you're going to really pursue it.
flexible, timing, overcoming fear. Like, yeah, there are that you can pick a skill that kind of can relate to your deficits, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So like for me, for instance, like if I would have picked to learn a front lever, like let's say 5 years ago, that would have forced me to really like bring up my pulling deficit, right? Like you can't have shitty pull-ups and do a front lever,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? Like,
Believe me, I tried.
yeah. And then like you said, like if you're super stiff in your back and you're like, you know what, I want to do a macaco by the end of the year, you got to work on your bridge flexibility a bunch.
A
And
lot.
you're going to get more flexible. And yeah.
Yeah, so I think one last thing about training is keeping in mind that progress isn't always linear. And so there's going to be a lot of like frustration along the way. And so just creating a relationship with frustration and you learn a lot of patience through working on skills and stuff like that. And so just like getting really comfortable in that space where you are working on something and you still can't do it and you've been working on it for a while. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's super important. Yeah. That kind of brings us into like philosophy or more lifestyle advice for, the 10 years ago self. And like one of the biggest things is just like, don't rush. Like that causes so much problems for me in the past. And I just see it for so many people is like, you just get really motivated and then you go full into this thing and you want this thing so bad, but that motivation can't last. And like as much as you can just think, we've already kind of said this, but think of yourself in 1 year, in 5 years, in 3 years. Like you just have to have that bigger picture, or else like you'll just be starting a bunch of stuff and then like quitting, and then start another thing and then another flashy thing.
Oftentimes when I get really motivated about something, I think I maybe mentioned this before, but like you start getting your self-worth kind of tied up into that. And then when your expectations aren't fulfilled, where you were like, oh, I'm going to learn how to do this handstand and a 60-second handstand in 3 months, and then you don't do it, then you feel pretty shitty about yourself.
Yeah.
And then you lose motivation, and then maybe it's not for me or whatever. And if you would have just said like, I'm gonna do a 60-second handstand and I'm just gonna work on it for a long time until I can do it, then there's no expectations around it, and you can stay motivated, I think, a lot longer.
Yeah.
Which is importante.
Yeah. Another thing that I wrote down is to just to constantly like write down my goals and be reassessing my goals and making sure that they're aligning with like what I believe in and who I want to be, and not letting a goal from the past creep too far into the future if it's not something that is valuable to me anymore, right? Like I guess essentially I'm saying like be open to my interests changing, be open to my identity changing, because I think that's healthy, and that's how we grow, we evolve forward, and we change. And if you think that what fired you up 10 years ago is still going to fire you up now,
you might be pretty young.
Yeah.
Might be 25 years old. I feel like there's maybe for me a caveat there where if you want to create an expertise in something, there's going to be moments where that it maybe feels like you want to drift away from it, but there may be some lesson learned with sticking with it. So I mostly agree with what you're saying, but I think there are situations where it's like, I don't know, like maybe just pushing through that to get your black belt when you're a brown belt and you're like, I don't know if I want to, like right now I'm not so motivated.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. And I mean, like I purposely wrote that down to contradict some of the stuff that we had already talked about like we've talked so much about like you just have to be consistent and do something for a long period of time. But I totally agree. Like sometimes like the thing that you're doing, it loses some of its passion. but keep on doing it, and you get more. You keep on getting more from it.
Yeah.
But
It
at the
comes
same
in
time, like
waves.
you got to be willing to like, look at yourself as a person who has needs outside of just your physical practice,
Yeah.
and think about what will really fill me up right now. Like maybe going out and trying to run. Like I've never done that in my life. Like let me like stop doing this shit that I'm getting bored with and go try something new. Like sometimes that really fill your spirit up, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe a way that makes sense to me framing it is chase feelings first. And so, if the reason why you set a goal initially is because you thought that goal would bring you some feeling. And ultimately, it's the feeling you're after. So, if the goal is fairly arbitrary.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, like, I think just like what you said, sitting down regularly and really thinking critically. It's like, well, what feeling am I chasing? And like, is that, are there different goals I could set for myself that would give me that feeling?
Yeah, yeah, and man, it's tricky. Like, like sometimes you just need to push forward, and sometimes you need to be willing to walk away from something. So that's on an individual basis.
Yeah.
I did want to say for like kind of more philosophical part of training is like I would tell myself to value like social group sessions more, like going to the gym with friends. Like that's how I started the gym, was I would go with like four of my buddies or some of my best friends in high school, and we'd go and it'd be so fun. And then somewhere along the way, like I became more of a lone wolf person, just going to the gym, doing my training sessions solo. I think there's tons of value in being able to be comfortable just putting your work in a lot on your own. But I got too into that, and like just having fun with what you're doing and not taking it so seriously. That's big advice to myself.
Yeah. Share it with other people, and also like not taking it so seriously. I think one thing that we've talked about, I don't know if we're talking about it on a podcast or not, but we really like, I really like the idea of taking something very seriously, whatever it is, training, a goal, lifestyle, whatever. But then also be able to like step out of it and laugh at it at the same time. Be like, that's pretty silly though. I'm just standing on my hands.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? So like I think having that ability to step outside of yourself and just, realize that we're monkeys on a rock in space
Yeah.
and nothing's that serious
Yeah.
is nice. And that's, I think, being around friends can remind you of that.
Yeah. Like just as much as you're taking you think you're like 400-pound squat is the most important thing in the world, and just right down the block, like someone playing the piano thinks like that's the most important thing in the world, and everybody has their thing that they just, and it's like if you can get outside of yourself and just be like, oh man, we're all just trying to find things we're interested in while we're here passing our time, and like it's not that serious. And yeah, I think like I would just encourage myself to always play before training. And like if there's a time when I'm supposed to have a training session, but some friends invited me to go, play something in a park or something, like take that over the training. You can do the training session the next day. You can push that off,
I literally did that last night.
Yes.
I was going to do some training, and Mitch hit me up, our brother, and I went and hung out with him instead.
Nice.
Because that's important.
Yeah, there we go.
Something you said sparked this thought for me. I think one mistake I made a lot when I was younger was I would think that by training more, my body, in my case it's my body, but I think everyone has their thing. Somehow I'd be like more self-confident, or just like be in the world more comfortably, and I think it's only partially true. I think that it's one of those things where if you're thinking about it that way and you're trying to chase self-confidence or self-worth, the more you conceive of it that way in your mind, it's like when you are trying to remember someone's name, and the harder you think about it,
Yeah.
it's like it runs further away from you in your mind, and you just need to kind of chill and walk away from it, and then it hits you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, for at least that's the way I conceive of it, where if I'm training my body so that I'll be more confident, I actually probably will lose confidence in myself.
Yeah.
Whereas if I just train and have fun and like do it because I know it's fulfilling in some way, and just kind of release that expectation, all of a sudden I do feel more confident about myself, you know?
Yes. Yeah. That's a really good point. So, I had this thought a while ago that when I was like, some of the most attractive people are sometimes artists, right? Like, say, a musician, or even like an athlete. So let's say like a surfer or something like that. Like, and like these people, the thing is that like a musician doesn't like get really good at playing the guitar to have that self-confidence. Like, that's usually like the most attractive people are people that are like really passionate about like this process that they're in. They go surfing every day because that's just like what they love, and like how that, you know what I mean? And like to your point, it's like you don't do that stuff to gain some notoriety and to like gain self-worth and self-confidence. It's just what you do, and then people are really attracted to that. Like, you know, it's interesting. It's like your intentions just have to be really pure.
Yeah, it's very much like process oriented instead of goal oriented.
Yeah.
Where
That's it.
it's like I'm just gonna like create this lifestyle. I'm gonna create these habits, and like they'll get me to where I need to go.
Yeah.
But it's more important to thinking about what's right in front of me right now, and it's, you know, it's just being in the moment, being present, have fun,
Yeah.
working hard,
Working hard.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, on another lifestyle tip for myself, I wrote down to do bold things that correlate to your life situation. And what I basically mean by that is like, if you're young, if you just got out of college, or maybe you didn't even go to university, and you're single, and like really live that life. Like, what can you do when you have no responsibilities? And, you know, go travel the world, you know, like go like live in your van and freaking climb or train every day or whatever. Like, really just be bold and do that thing. And then when it's time to change, like, then, you know, maybe it's a different situation. Maybe you do have a girlfriend, maybe she's pregnant, then like really like be bold and go into that situation, you know? And like, I think whatever your life situation, like really live it to the fullest, because it's going to change, and you want to look back on that time and be like, wow, I used that wisely. And like, I'm so glad that I actually like went out and traveled a bit, because like that was the time of my life to do it. And like I couldn't do it now. Like, I have a totally different life, you know, it wouldn't be the same basically. Yeah.
Yeah, lead with courage for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, if I think about, I mean, for me, 10 years ago was like early 20s. And so in my early 20s, it was definitely a time where I was actually like very reserved and contained in like the life that I had created. And I wasn't very courageous in like going out and trying to, you know, basically take control of life. I wouldn't have thought that at the time, but if I, you know, upon reflection, I wish I would have.
You were being a bit more safe.
Yeah, exactly.
Than it felt like at the time. But now with 2020 vision, you're like, oh, I was in my bubble.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe I'll look back on now and think that, but yeah, I mean, just embracing life, and I think part of it is creating a good relationship with like failure, because I think ultimately being safe is a fear of failure in some way. And so the idea of going out and traveling to me probably was like being scared of failing at a career that I had just started, or
Yeah.
or just like running out of money. That was failure in my mind, or even just like, I don't know, maybe even not having as much, like being scared that I would not have fun while I was out traveling, or like not live up to what the expectation of what traveling was. It's like it was just being so scared all the time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and just like failure's fine. You have to fail to succeed, and it's so cliche, but it's so true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What it makes me think of is predictability is so comfortable. So like when you're thinking like, well, I don't know how I'll actually like traveling, and there's so much that is
Yeah.
unknown about it. But your life here. You know what? I'm gonna go to work Monday through Friday. I go to my gym, then I'm gonna go out and have a couple drinks with my friends.
I got
Here,
the
it's like
paycheck to afford it.
it's all predictable, so it's very, very safe. And ultimately, there's nothing wrong with that. But like, there's a fulfillment that comes from being courageous and like doing something that, oh man, I've always had this deep feeling that I just want to travel to Scotland. I just want to go see it. Like, and you do it, and it just feels good, man.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean on the training side,
Yeah.
if you're playing it safe, like to me, going to a gym and just like working out all the time is playing it safe. But try jujitsu and get choked out a bunch. That's not safe at all, and it's so fulfilling, And that's just an example. But like, go fail at shit and
Yeah.
try on different hats all the time, and like
Yeah.
you'll be surprised what actually ends up being fulfilling.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's it. That's
Yeah.
it. That's life.
That's life. I just summed it up right there. So if you guys could give your 10-year-old self, no, not 10-year-old self, if you could give yourself advice 10 years ago, the version of you, what kind of advice would you give? Drop it in the comment. I'd love to read some of your guys' advices.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. We'll see you next time.
Like, subscribe. Peace.